Let's have another example, problem number 2. The average baptismal cost includes 50 guests, a random sample of 32 baptismal during the past year in the National Capital Region had a mean of 53 guests and a standard deviation of 10. Is there sufficient evidence at the 0.05 level of significance that the average number of guests differs from the national average? So again, for step 1, we have to identify the null and alternative hypothesis for this problem. From the previous lesson, we already identified the null hypothesis of this given problem as population mean is equal to 50, and the alternative hypothesis as the population mean is not equal to 50. Step 2, we now identify the level of significance and identify if this problem is under one-tailed or two-tailed test. For the level of significance, as you can see, it is directly stated in the given problem that at the 0.05 level of significance, so meaning to say the level of significance or the alpha level for this problem is 0.05. Next is to identify if this is under one-tailed test or two-tailed test. So we just have to go back to the alternative hypothesis and check what mathematical symbol did we use. So in this problem, we use a not equal symbol or unequal symbol. So meaning to say this problem is under two-tailed test since we use the not equal symbol. Next, step 3 is to identify what statistical test are we going to use. Since the sample in this given problem is 32, then the statistical test we will use for this one is one sample z-test. Step 4 is the computation, but first we have to identify the given numerical values before we proceed further with the computation itself. Let's now identify the numerical values one by one. The first sentence states that the average baptismal cost includes 50 guests. So meaning to say the population mean is 50 since they are referring to the totality of the guests included for the baptismal cost. Next sentence, we have a random sample. So meaning to say, since we have the term sample, the preceding numerical values will be for the intended for the sample. Next, a random sample of 32 baptismal. So meaning to say, the 32 refers to the number of sample of baptismal for this given word problem. So meaning to say 32 is the value for n. During the past year in the National Capital Region had a mean of 53 guests. So yung mean natin for 53 guests, since this is still under the sentence for the random sample, meaning to say the mean na 53 is the sample mean. And a standard deviation of 10. And since this phrase is still under the sentence where they explain the values for the random sample, meaning to say the standard deviation is the sample standard deviation. The values are now complete and we already identified all the numerical values in the given problem. So we can now proceed with the computation. But first, you have to choose what formula for one sample z-test are we going to use. Is it the one that uses the population standard deviation, or is it the formula that uses the sample standard deviation? So given this problem, the given value is the sample standard deviation. So we have to use the formula that uses the sample standard deviation. Substituting the values, we will have 53 minus 50 all over 10 over the square root of 32. So all we have to do is solve this one using the calculator, and then we can already have the value for the z computed. The computation for a 4-liner calculator is on the left side, while on the right side, this is for a 2-liner calculator. Rounding off to two decimal places, we will have the z computed as 1.70. Again, the values for z computed should be rounded off into two decimal places. Step 5 is the decision rule. Again, the decision rule for all the problems under one sample series will be reject null hypotheses if the absolute value of z computed is greater than the absolute value of z tabular. So, since we already computed for the z computed, we now have to identify the z tabular for this given problem. Using this table again, we will now identify the z tabular. So, for us to identify the z tabular, we have to go back to the step 2 and recall what is the level of significance and the tail test for this given problem. Recalling the values for step 2, we have the level of significance as 0.05 and tail test is 2 tail test. For us to identify the C-tabular, all you have to do is draw a horizontal line passing through the row two-tailed. Tapos, you have to draw a vertical line passing through the column of level of significance with 0.05. Getting the intersection of those two lines, the Z-tabular for this given word problem is 1.96. Having the value for the z computed and the z tabular, all we have to do is substitute the values in the decision rule. So we have the z computed as 1.70 and the z tabular as 1.96. Next, step 6, we have to identify if we have to reject or failed to reject we failed to reject the null hypothesis. Going back to step 5, we have to check if the given inequality is satisfied or not, or let's just say if the given inequality is true or false. So, the given inequality for step 5 is 1.70 daw is greater than or equal to 1.96. Is it true or is it false? So, obviously, it is false since 1.96 is bigger than 1.70. So, meaning to say, since the inequality is not satisfied, then we failed to reject the null hypothesis. Next, step 7 is we have to conclude based on step 6. So, since we failed to reject the null hypothesis, we have to stick with the null hypothesis. Then going back to step 1, our null hypothesis is the population mean is equal to 50. So, what can we infer from that population mean is equal to 50? So, that population mean equal to 50 can only be parang concluded as the average baptismal cost includes 50 guests.